Bhagavad Gita, chapter 1, verses 44 to 46. I regret our strange choice to commit such terrible acts. We were driven by greed, by my desire to become a king. This has led us to try to kill our relatives. Even if I did not resist, unarmed as the sons of Dhritarashtra killed me on the field, it would be a better thing. Sanjaya said, thus having spoken, Arjuna sat down again on the chariot, on the battlefield, putting aside his bow and arrows. He was distressed by the grief in his heart. These are the last 3 verses of the first chapter, and they conclude Arjuna's crisis, and his arguments with regards to his crisis. And as you can see, it ends with him literally collapsing. He collapses inside of his chariot. He tosses aside his bows and arrows, which are the symbol of the direction of his will. The arrow is like the sword, and a symbol, a very powerful and ancient symbol that has a symbolic representation as the extension of a person's vision, of a person's will. And in the West, usually the sword was the more common version of this symbol. Although we see in the West, for example, with the symbol for Sagittarius, the arrow pointing upwards is our will aspiring towards something higher. And in India, the arrow was considered, the bow and the arrow were considered the symbol of this kind of directed awareness at this time. But because of the grief in Arjuna's heart, he's thrown aside his bow and arrows and he's slumped down in his chariot. He was being led then through this process of his ego, which was fed by fears, not a fear of dying in battle. It's not that he was afraid he was going to die, but that he wasn't going to get out of the battle one way or the other. What his ego was telling him was the result he wanted, was the thing he wanted to happen that would make him happy. He realized just as the battle was about to start that he wasn't going to get that either way, whether he won or he lost. And this is what caused him distress. So Arjuna has let his mind take him all the way into the utterly wrong conclusion. He's ended up in the place of stuckness, literally stuck and slumped on his chariot in the middle of the battlefield, paralyzed and impotent. So he's calling now what he said before, what he was doing before, a strange choice. He says, I regret our strange choice to commit such terrible acts. And this is a very common thing that happens when you're acting naturally, when you're acting in a way that you've shown up, that you're in the moment, that you're doing your will, and then suddenly something happens to give you pause. You stop, you ask why, you suddenly start thinking of all the reasons that this is crazy what you're doing, this action that has become, that had come out of something completely spontaneous in you. As soon as you stop long enough to question it, then all of these reasons show up as to why you shouldn't be doing this. And you start to think that you were crazy before in what you were doing. And your mind starts talking you out of what your inner spiritual heart is trying to get you to do. This is the struggle that anybody who's involved in spirituality will have likely experienced or will experience at some point if they haven't yet. He's become almost like asleep on the literal symbol of a deep unconsciousness. He's slumped down like an unconscious man in his chariot, and he's completely lost track of that moment, of the now, of showing up to be present in reality that he at one point had. So the thing is that mystics, the path of a mystic, always seems incomprehensible to someone who is trying to look at things from the point of view of the ego programming, of what it is that we're told we're supposed to do or how we're supposed to act. It seems strange to someone who is watching or listening with that set of programs rather than with the heart. Someone who's open to the heart won't need an explanation, but they'll instead be able to recognize spontaneously in the joy in their hearts the truth, the reality of what's in front of them. This isn't to be anti-intellectual, but it's saying that if intellectually there are moments where the programming in the mind, where the computer in the brain gets in the way of your ability to manifest the truth of your will. I'm a fairly intellectual person, so I'm not suggesting that we have to reject intellectuality, but that the mind is not meant to be the master over you. It's meant to be the tool that you use. And there's a moment where you have to put down that tool and pick up a different one, which is the heart. Arjuna is now saying that his previous acts were only selfish. They were greedy. They were just because he wanted to be a king. But this isn't true at all. And if you look at the context of the stories in the Mahabharata, you'll see that that's not what this is about. It wasn't for any of the five brothers, any of the Pandavas. They were doing something out of a sense of duty, out of a sense of that it was necessary to prevent evil. And so he's created this complete falsehood, this complete illusion about what he was doing before, as a way to try to stop himself from being able to break out of his unconsciousness. And this is the thing. There are a lot of people who are in a kind of a state of robotic programmed unconsciousness because they haven't had a moment that snaps them awake yet. But there's also a lot of people who have those moments and choose instead to stay in that state of unconsciousness, and in fact put up a great amount of effort, a great amount of energy to keep preventing themselves from changing, to make a point of being able to stay where they are. And to do that, you have to build up a whole bunch of reasons why change is not possible. So he's doing all this, and people do all this because of an unwillingness to abandon one single concept, one idea. And this is the idea that allows the ego to ultimately control us. And it has all kinds of different ways of expressing itself. But in everyone, the fundamental seed of that idea is the same. It's the idea that I call self-referencing. It's the idea that the perspective of the universe has to be referred to through the self rather than the other way around, the self being expressed by the entirety of the universe. So it's making yourself little instead of making yourself big. It's the most fundamental problem of human consciousness. It's the heart of darkness, you could call it. It's this idea that life should do for you what you want it to do. It should be what you want it to be, what you think is best, what your notions are. You get to impose that on life, and not the other way around, that life is something that works on you, and that you can only exist as a manifestation of life. You instead want the whole universe to work as a manifestation of your referential self. This is very similar to what in Western philosophy was called solipsism, this idea that the whole universe is just a product of your own perceptions. And it's not exactly that, because you can still believe that there's a separate universe, but you want that universe to be what you expect it to be, rather than becoming an expression of what the universe is. So this is the core definition of attachment, is the source of all attachment. It's saying, I don't want to have to change in accordance with the universe. I want the universe to change in accordance with me. But our true selves, our true will, is an expression of the universe. It's a part of the body of the universe. And so what our real selves can't be that thing. It can't be the little man that is trying to impose itself on creation. We're a part of creation. So we have to become that bigger picture. And in the next video, I start with Krishna's rebuttal to what Arjuna was arguing.